So welcome today to the virtual table dialogue to shine the spotlight on the US agricultural sector. And thanks to our event partner, Innovation Cluster, which plays a special role in Australia driving regional innovation. So my name is Georgie Harrowell, based here in Sydney, work for the US Commercial Service. And today is an opportunity to have an engaging discussion to exchange ideas on how the agricultural technologies are unlocking productivity improvements, improving animal welfare, unlocking new value chains, and creating new communication pathways between farmers and consumers. And the growth in Australia is huge and has had ripple effects throughout the world. And we'll hear from Aussie companies that have expanded into the US today, which is great, driving positive change. So we encourage this session to be as engaging as possible. So I created it more like a virtual roundtable versus a webinar. So we look forward to your questions. Please mute yourself, and if you've got a question, just raise your hand in the WebEx function and we'll be sure to get to your question, and we're looking to answer them as we go. So we do have a fantastic lineup of speakers. As you can see here, we're going to begin with our US Consul General in Perth, Siri Nair. So she's a career Foreign Service officer with the US Department of State. Prior to her assignment in Perth, she served as the Deputy Political Counselor at the US Mission in Brazil, advancing bilateral geopolitical objectives during a period of transformation in Brazil's foreign policy. Prior to Brazil, the Consul General served as the Acting Political Counselor at the US Mission in Jakarta, overseeing US engagements on issues relating to democracy, human rights, military security operations in the South China Sea. She's had multiple postings throughout your time, to name a few: Morocco, Washington, Philippines, Manila, India. I'd now like to pass it over to Consul General Siri Nair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgie, and thank you especially for organizing this virtual roundtable, which will focus on the US AgTech sector. So I'm really delighted to be here today. My name is Siriana Nair, and I am the US Consul General here in Perth. Working here in Western Australia, I'm passionate about promoting the two-way investment relationship between the United States and Australia, which it's hard to believe, but it totals a staggering 1.7 trillion Australian dollars. And also happy to be partnering with the Perth-based Innovation Cluster today. And grateful for this opportunity also to connect with you today from rural and remote areas of Western Australia and across the country as well. So thank you to all of you who are participating, listening, and sharing your experiences. So the United States remains the largest destination for Australian overseas capital. And at any one time, we have over 240,000 Australians living in the United States. The US-Australian Free Trade Agreement, which has been in effect since 2005, has really contributed to the growth of investment between the two countries. So since 2005 and the Free Trade Agreement, the Australian-US investment relationship has nearly tripled and has increased by more than $1.2 trillion, or 283%. So that's great news for both of our countries. Australian companies of all sizes are increasingly looking into expansion in the US market, and the United States has become a major agribusiness hotspot for Australian AgTech. So pointing to the increasing need for new automation technologies and also the size of investment opportunities in recent years. So agriculture, food, and related industries have contributed over $1 trillion to the US GDP, gross domestic product, in 2020. And we have a highly diversified agricultural market with a wide range of crops, livestock, and farming practices. And so this diversity really creates a demand for a variety of agricultural technologies and solutions. And this provides Australian developers opportunities to showcase their products and services and expand their customer base. And I should note that Australian companies have a track record of succeeding in the United States. We have Ruminate based right here in Western Australia, and you'll hear from them today. We have FarmBot in Sydney, who will share their US story, as well as New Farm, Elders, Fluorosat, The Yield, and AgTech, just a couple of the companies who are doing well in the United States. The US has a really strong tradition of innovation and technological advancement in agriculture. And so many of the world's leading agricultural research institutions and universities are based in the United States. And this culture of innovation really creates a receptive market for new agricultural technologies and solutions. And so for that reason, the US market is actually an ideal market for Australian developers to introduce and test their products. Partnering with some of the world's largest and most influential ag tech companies in the US, Australian companies can gain access to a vast network of consumers and distributors. So we think this is an excellent partnership and way to really strengthen cooperation in both our countries and benefits to both our countries. We have an annual GDP of over $20 trillion and a population of over 325 million people. And so we are a very attractive, I hope you will agree, consumer market, offering unmatched diversity and a thriving culture of innovation, as well as a highly productive workforce. So companies of all sizes, from startups to multinationals, can find ideas and resources and market to succeed and grow. So really there is room for everybody. And I'm looking forward to the discussion today. I hope you will come away with new opportunities, ideas for opportunities and collaboration with our ag tech sector in the United States. And so looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Consul General Naya. Now I'd like to introduce Melanie Timms, Operations Manager from Innovation Cluster. So she's representing Tash Teakle today. So Innovation Cluster and their AgriArm AgriStart are focused on helping startups to grow. They run programs, workshops and activities. I'll let Melanie elaborate further. We first met at WestTech in Perth, so it's great to connect virtually today. Thanks.
Thanks, Georgie. Hello from Wadandi Budja. We're based in Vass near Busselton in Western Australia. So we're actually about 2.5 hours south of Perth, and I'm sitting in Dunsborough now, which is about 3 hours south of Perth. So we are regionally based, but we do work very closely with businesses all over the state and the country as well. Particularly relevant to today is our Harvest AgTech Accelerator program, which we've been running for 6 years now, and we have supported over 70 businesses that continue to be in our alumni and part of our network. And doing business in the US is the next step for many of those businesses that have participated in our program. So we're so pleased to be able to work with the US Commerce Service to offer today's session with some expert advice and helpful insights from businesses who've had success in this space. And finally, I just wanted to give a final reminder that applications for our 2023 program for the Harvest AgTech Accelerator close tomorrow at 5 o'clock. So if this is of interest, any innovative AgTech businesses are encouraged to apply, and I can pop the link for more information and to apply in the chat as well. But thank you so much, Georgie and the US Consul and General, and looking forward to hearing the next hour. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. We'll definitely share that program in the follow-up email. So it sounds like a great program. I'd now like to introduce the panel for today, which is really exciting, moderated by commercial specialist Duncan Archibald. So we have David Messina, CEO and co-founder of Ruminate, and Andrew Coppin, CEO of FarmBot, who are both from Western Australia, and they shared their lessons learned expanding to the US. Just a quick fun facts about them. So David Messina is from a big farming family in Mullua in Western Australia. Ruminate has established an office in California, and they are on the path to accelerating a pathway to a world with secure, climate optimal food system. David Coppin is CEO and co-founder of FarmBot, with family ties as well and experience on cattle stations. He is a driven business leader focused on developing AgriTech to improve farm productivity, profitability, and efficient supply chains, which is very important following the pandemic. FarmBot was established in Sydney in 2014 and created a SaaS platform which gathers data points via unique IoT device that puts farmers in the know on their water assets with near real-time reporting. So I'll pass it over to Duncan. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Georgie, for the intro. Welcome everyone. Duncan Archibald. I've worked with Georgie in the US consulate in Sydney. So we're going to run through for about 15 minutes today for everyone. We're really just going to talk about the companies, both Ruminate and FarmBot, and just sort of understand what their business is, where they're along in the journey, and what they've done in entering the US market. And if there are any questions that you feel that you want asked along the way, please drop them in the chat, and we're happy to develop hopefully an organic discussion as we go along. I think, notwithstanding Georgie's intro, perhaps David and Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves, your backgrounds, and then perhaps give us some detail on your company and the products and what problems you're trying to solve in your respective markets. So David, could we start with you first, please?
Sure. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity. Look, as in introduction, grew up on a family farm, wheat and sheep, as it used to be categorised many years ago. Educated in Perth, UWA, Ag Science. Started my career in agriculture for a number of years, always looking at new technology, starting in seed and breeding, and then that moved into GMO technology and biotech. I came together with my co-founders for Ruminate a couple of years ago. I've worked with them off and on my journey. They have a strong pharmaceutical and biotech background. So what we were able to do between myself with a heavy agriculture and commercialization focus with some global experience is combine that with some fantastic technology and experience and people out of the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, and we came up with a pharmaceutical grade product in Ruminate that reduces methane emissions in sheep and cattle by over 90% in some cases and in some trials. So a dramatic high impact product. We've further refined that now, and we now have products that in an oil-based solution. We have some pellets that animals can eat in a supplement feeding basis or a feedlot. We're making fantastic inroads into delivering a product in water, so we can tackle the extensive grazing challenge both in Northern Australia but globally. And finally, we're working on a slow release product that will eventually go into a large capsule called a bolus and sit within the animal, hopefully for 6 to 9 months. So our point of difference for us, I think, is we've got that ag and farmer background in the founding base. We've all got a little bit of grey hair and some scars from previous experiences, which has been helpful. We've got a really scalable product that we think is low cost and high quality, and we've got a massive problem with, obviously, around 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions can be attributed directly to methane production from domesticated livestock. So a slightly different approach to a big problem has, I guess, led us to where we are now, and through that very, very quick journey, really, we've been lucky enough to attract some fantastic investors out of the US with Prelude Ventures, and breakthrough energy, and also some great domestic investors with the Aware Super Fund and Harvest Road.
Thank you, Dave.
Roughly.
Thank you very much for that intro, excuse me. And Andrew, over to you at FarmBot.
Yes, well, good morning or evening, whichever the case may be. I'm coming from New Mexico in the USA this evening, but I did grow up in Western Australia and spent some time driving around checking water on cattle stations as a kid. So it's a bit bizarre, really, that 30 plus years later I'm solving that problem of farmers, or ranchers as they are known in this part of the world, driving around checking water that 95% of the time doesn't need checking, but the 5% of times that it does, it's critical. And yeah, I met my co-founder Craig back in 2014. We really spent the first 3 years with him in the garage and me talking to farmers and ranchers. And fast forward to today, we're 53 people in our team. We're on 4,000 cattle and sheep stations around Australia. The companies that we're working for, the custodians of about 10 million beef cattle and about 15 million sheep. So to think that we look after the water and infrastructure for that many animals every day is a big responsibility that we take very seriously. Our device monitors the water and water pumps, pipes, and infrastructure that supports the livelihood of those animals and the health and welfare of those animals in real time using satellite technology direct from the field or the paddock. You have to forgive me because I'll interchange American terminology with Australian terminology. In Australia, my company is FarmBot. In America, you might see from my shirt here, we're RanchBot, because a farm is not a ranch. Just like a farm is not a station. So I guess one of the points I'd make today is that terminology and understanding the market that you're going to, if in the US, is really, really critical. So to the point where we had to change the name of the company so that it resonated with the audience that we're targeting here. So very quickly today, I've only have 5 people here in the US. But we're on 250 ranches, and obviously the market here is 5x Australia in our area of expertise, but it is 25x in Brazil and Argentina and other places. And so we made a conscious decision to come here to the US, consolidate this North American market and using it ultimately in 25, 26 as a launch pad to go to other markets. Certainly been a very interesting journey getting here to the US. We did about 18 months of homework, of workshops with Austrade and other agencies, of accelerator programs, and of ground truthing before we even went and spoke to the first rancher. And then we spent about 18 months talking to ranchers on the road, physically, reassuring ourselves of what we were doing and making sure we did never assume that what we were doing in Australia, no matter how successful, was going to work here. We took it from a zero base and built it up from there. So that's me and FarmBot, or as I am today, RanchBot.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. David, if I can just go back to you just quickly, can you sort of detail, Andrew started sort of alluding to it as well. Can you detail your approach to the US market, when that perhaps started? Was there an expectation that you were going to get it done in a couple of years? I would imagine COVID threw up some challenges, but perhaps if you sort of start with, when that journey started and how you really approached the market. I'm sure for people they'd be interested to know, to get an example of someone in Australia who's been and done it, and some of the things that you saw along the way.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a completely different market, and there's two elements to the market that I might talk to quite separately. One is, the end user, or the number of cattle, which in our case is a 10x on Australia, roughly. So that's the end point. But if we just take a step back, because, we formed the view that we needed to have US investors on our register as part of that migration, if you like, of the business and expansion. And we found very quickly that, the level of sophistication, the interconnectivity of that investment group is just at another level. So we actually had to briefly pause and make sure we understood exactly what we wanted to achieve in that market, and how we wanted to do that, because the culture is you need to be confident. You need to be very, very clear about what product you have or service, as the case may be, the value proposition around that, and what your plans may be, over the preceding 5 and 10 years. And that actually takes quite a bit of work to get right. And I think within that, if coming from an Australian perspective, which is 10% of that market in many, many ways, if you can't add zeros with some credibility to your marketing plan, then it's the US, is a tough market to get into. They position themselves to solve global problems, not domestic problems. That's the starting point. So if you can't have that conversation early, it's really hard to penetrate, if you like. And I'm talking that first financial step now, which we saw as critical, because when you build that, when you do break through, because you've got some of those things I just mentioned, right, that actually starts to open up networks, obviously, and they can actually assist you with some of those other things, which is that ground truthing, which is essential, in any market, and the US is no different, other than it's geographically quite large. So it has some logistical challenges. And then the second element is, what's the value proposition to the ultimate customer? And then trying to define who that ultimate customer is. And one of the things we're finding, as we touch briefly each global market, is, in our particular case, the ultimate customer might actually be quite different. It might be a food company in some jurisdictions where there's pressure on a food company to have a carbon-friendly product on the shelf, whatever that might be. It may not be the obvious one, which is a piece of meat. It could be a dairy product, for example. And they could be the customer in one particular geographic region, or even within, when we look at the US, even from north to south, is quite different. So understanding the various dynamics, so that you can actually present at least the outlines of a big plan, I think is critical.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, David. So to you, Andrew, I mean, David touched on a bit of it. How do you do your market research then? What's the process and the strategy for that?
Yeah, so again, I mean, we leveraged good programs that were being run by Austrade and the landing pad out of San Francisco, and participated in a couple of events there. We participated in an accelerator program run out of Silicon Valley, which was all about how to come to the US and do it well. And then, we ultimately engaged, a couple of people that had done it before to sort of help us build a framework around how we would do it. A lot of considerations around the corporate setup, and I'm sure you'll probably hear a bit later from Blair at a climb that, really going to America, you have to think about, it's almost 52 different countries with states and state-by-state regulations and things. So being very mindful about where you're setting up, how you're setting up, what structure, what bank accounts, where you've got people located and where you're going to employ them. All of these things have significant ramification, unlike in Australia, where, you know, I employed someone in Australia and, you know, the rules are pretty universal. That is not necessarily the case in the US. So we did all of that homework. In our case, we actually wanted to manufacture our product out of the US as well. So then we started doing a roadshow talking to potential manufacturers. I think I drove about 3,000 miles and visited 7 different states to meet with manufacturers, and we were trying to find people that were the right size for us, that we would be a reasonable customer for. You know, we went to some of the big firms and thought, okay, we're just going to be 0.01% of their manufacturing, so why bother? We actually adopted an approach for our company, our size as an Aussie scale-up, that we would really only try and deal with companies that were family-owned. So like us, they could relate to us. And our outsourced manufacturer, who a company called Lima, that's based in Dallas, Texas, and in California, you know, we speak direct to the owner, even though the business, you know, is been going for 50 years and has 600 staff. So we wanted to find the manufacturer, and then we went and sought advice from people like Climb, who again you're going to hear from a bit later on this call, and they just helped us, you know, fast track, you know, bank accounts, corporate governance, all of those sort of things. So for us, as I mentioned, it was really 18-month getting educated, and then an 18-month ground truthing and sourcing the who, what, where, why, how. And here we are. We officially launched in America on the 1st of February, and you know, now have 5 staff manufacturing in Dallas, Texas, offices in California, and you know, we're ready, willing, and able to scale. We don't have to have so many question marks now around, you know, oh, are we doing this right, and have we got that right? You know, we sort of took all those concerns out of the equation so we can run fast.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. David, to you, it's my understanding you set up in San Francisco. How important is the cohort of Australian companies that are there to lean on, if you will, to perhaps get some guidance from, to understand? I mean, because that, you know, it's my understanding in San Francisco, there's quite Austrade has a community of, you know, a landing pad, and you know, there's quite a community of expats. Is it something that along the way that you ran recourse to, not necessarily the Austrade, I mean, great if you did, but just more broadly, the expats that are there and their experiences and their connections and things? I suppose I'm thinking of for companies that are looking at the market, how important it is to speak to people who have done it before.
Oh, look, you know, with this example, with Ruminate or other businesses that I've started in Europe, it's absolutely critical that you lean on fellow Australians wherever they are. You know, everybody wants to, you know, we've got that general culture of wanting to help, and also understanding, if you've done it once or twice, how bloody hard it is. So you know, there's open doors there, I find, you know, in anywhere around the world, where if you've got Australians that will generally take a phone call or an email or set up a meeting, and 100% that should be utilised and encouraged, because you know, we like to help each other if we can. It's a pretty competitive world out there, and to be sitting around with a group of Australian companies, you know, in California somewhere is a great thing to do, and to lean on each other and work, you know, try and help each other make less mistakes. We've all got plenty of mistakes we'll make at different times, and we'll pivot and we'll work our way through those. But if we can make a few less, then everyone's happy.
Great, yeah, good point. Andrew, just to you, again, if I'm a company out of Australia and I'm saying to you, you know, how do you do your biz dev? Is it something that you you know, my understanding of the States, fairly fragmented market. You've got lots of tax nexuses in different states and things. do you go and tackle the whole thing to get at once? Can you simply just rock up to people and have conversations with them? Do you focus and say, look, let's just look at a couple of states that we know that there's a heavy ag sector that we can just go and, how do you do it? Or do you need to go through someone, to get those first couple of sales?
I think it's a great question, but I think it does depend a bit on what you're going to do. I think it's just a coincidence that we've got two companies on this call that are doing livestock related things. We're more rangelands, and a lot of David stuff's rangelands and feedlots, which is a massive market here. Not big in Australia, but if you were doing row crops, or you were doing genetics, or you were doing something else, I mean, across America there are different heartlands of technology, spheres of influence. You might find yourself in Iowa, or you might find yourself on the East Coast if you're doing dairy, and you might find yourself in, if you're at the bleeding edge of tech, you're probably closer to Silicon Valley, but you might be down in Fresno or something, if you're focused around water. So I think it just depends on what you're trying to do, and you have to understand that landscape. But then again, and this may depend on what you're going to do, but like my advice and the advice I heard from everyone, and I think I asked everyone that we asked, what's the thing I'm going to get wrong? And they said the one thing you're going to get wrong, no matter how many times I've bloody told you, is you're going to go and try and boil the ocean and do it all, because you're an entrepreneur and you won't be able to help yourself. And so we are bloody mindedly focused around California, New Mexico, Arizona and Texas, being 4 states in America with massive numbers of livestock and massive water issues. Now, other people from Colorado and Oregon and Wyoming and Nebraska and all these other really, really attractive places to go that have more cattle in them than Australia, in some instances, you get pulled towards them. But, you have to realise as a scale-up company, you could spend $5 million in one of those states and not even touch the sites and not even get noticed if you haven't done your homework correctly. And lots of, there are a litany of failed stories of people coming to America and trying to do that, blowing a $10 million marketing budget and then, leaving to wherever they came from. So you have to be hyper focused, in my view. Have we got that right? I'd give us a 7 out of 10. Should we only be doing California before we go somewhere else? Maybe you could argue yes, do one state and do it really well and own it and dominate it. But for us Aussies, I think that's very challenging. So yeah, state by state biz dev, and then you need to know the people. Again, regulations, setups, taxes, all different in every state. And to the point I made earlier that you're dealing in 52 other countries, and I say this with the utmost respect to all Americans on this call, they would laugh heartily if they were here, but the people in California are not the people in Texas, and they all know it, and they do not think the same, they do not act the same, and they do not have the same sort of outlook on life. So you can't, if you rocked up to Texas trying to sell a product and saying we're from California, I would get ready for a very rude surprise. You may get nowhere. So yes, very hyper-focused biz dev, state by state. And if you want to go and do it, try and find the state your product's going to be strongest, and just do that and nothing else other than that.
Thank you.
I just noticed we had a question pop up. Brad, did you want to speak about your question, or I'm happy to read it, but feel free to jump in.
Yeah, just interested in your experience around raising capital in the US. I'm from Export Finance Australia, so we're a Australian federal government debt funder. So we're closely tied into the Austrade and DFAT networks around the world. And our role is just to try to help businesses with their expansion into foreign markets. It's more focused on commercialized businesses, so not so much around startups and early stage businesses, but more around scale ups and what those that already have a commercial model. For those of you that know a little bit about row crops or broadacre, we've recently assisted both Seed Terminator and Kelly Engineering with exports of manufactured equipment into the US market. So open to connecting with people and assisting them, but really interested in Andrew and David, your experience around finance. My own understanding is that US market has got, really good venture capital appetite and the availability of funds for those that are well presented and can put forward an organised funding application. There's quite good availability over there, but what was your experience?
David, you go first.
Sure. Look, I would support that. There is almost an unlimited amount of money available from the perspective of a small to medium-sized company. There's just deep pools of cash. It's very climate focused and very climate centric, a lot of it. And within that, there's some that have a lot of experience in ag. So you can actually work your way through all that just by doing a bit of desktop research, and that narrows the focus down from what seems like a ridiculously large number of people to talk to a slightly smaller group. But they are very sophisticated and they see a lot, as you might imagine. The sheer volume of opportunities just domestically that get presented to them is enormous, and that's a great culture that they have. They don't mind risk. If anybody's come out of a typical sort of public equity market space, it's the complete opposite. They will encourage you to think big, to push yourself, and once they support a plan, they will, as long as you're tracking to that roughly, then they'll continue to support you. So thinking big and having a really, really sophisticated, well thought out plan and use of funds at another level completely to what you may be used to here in Australia. But once you get there, it is it's quite a different experience to anything here.
Yeah, I'd support that pretty much verbatim, but I would emphasise to those that are thinking about going there for capital. Yes, there is a lot of money, but this is money that sees pretty much every deal on the planet. So, if your pencil is not sharp and you don't know what you're talking about and you don't have an executable strategy that you can speak with absolute confidence about, you will not get a lot of time in the room. They might get up and just walk out and go, great, thanks. Good luck, and you'll never hear from them again. So it can be pretty brutal as well, because they see a lot of deal flow. I'm now on my third year here, purely relationship building, looking for the sort of capital we want to invest in us, because that's the other thing. There are many, many different forms of capital. Corporate venture, Sandhill Road venture, corporate agri businesses, high net worth offices. You need to think about what sort of capital you want and be mindful of approaching that sort of capital. So capital for capital's sake, doesn't matter if you're in Australia or the US or Israel. You want aligned capital that wants to support what you're doing and hopefully can open more doors. We're trying to find people that can get us on more ranches and be more collaborative for us, not just money that's looking for a 10x return and will sell my children if I don't deliver it. It's a big market. You need to be very well prepared and very, very sure of what you're doing. That is for sure.
This is actually a good segue, Andrew. When you talked about the vastness of the US market, I want to introduce you to our next speaker. And Carlos, I know you asked a question about, how are barriers to entry addressed. We have someone on the phone that can help that, or on the line, Blair Lucas. So just a quick intro on him. So Blair is the director of Acclaim, and Acclaim supports Australian companies with their US market entry. So they provide turnkey solutions to companies entering the US market, including company registrations, corporate office services, payroll, among other services, and they've supported over 120 innovative companies. So Blair, did you just want to highlight some of the solutions to these problems that people on the call are addressing or raising?
Yeah, thanks, Georgie. I appreciate that. I won't take up everybody's time. There's some really good conversations happening here that I don't really need to add a lot of value to. But I mean, look, these are generally the things that I talk about to companies such as FarmBot when expanding to the USA. It is a really, really confusing market. There's an awful lot of noise. And whilst everybody from Australia looks at the US market and says, wow, you know, look at the size, but look at the opportunities, it's extraordinarily competitive. And unfortunately, making a misstep, let's say, when going to the US can be really damaging. Not necessarily in terms of financial consequences, but you know, you only get one chance a lot of the times in the US. You've really got to do your homework. You've really got to go in with the right approach, the right strategy, and fully knowledgeable as to what the opportunities and the risks are. So look, I'm not going to talk through all of this because really a lot of the comments on this discussion from Andrew and David have covered off a lot of these, but location is critical. You've really got to be aware of the fact that it's not like Australia. You can't just go in, you can't just set up in California and then operate nationally. You need to think about the US as 50 different countries. I say 50, 52, including territories, but 50 different countries on the continental United States. Where do you need to be? Where do you need to operate? And the fact is 99% of our clients adopt the same strategy going into the US, which is setting up in Delaware and then expanding globally where you need to operate. And there's a good reason behind that. It's simple, straightforward, efficient, and allows you to really access the market in a manner that gives you a footprint you can then expand from. The other thing that we often find is everybody goes in wanting to set up an LLC, and that's because if you go online and look at companies set up in the US, everybody is marketing LLCs. And LLCs are really, really good if you are a US tax resident. But if you're not a US tax resident, LLCs are not good simply because they're so-called tax transparent or pass-through entities. And what that means is when you set up an LLC, you're deliberately exposing your Australian company to having to file tax returns in the United States. And one of the main reasons for setting up an entity in the US is so that you don't expose your Australian company to US taxes. You set up the equivalent of a proprietary limited, a PTY Ltd in the US, and then you can sit back and say, no, my Australian company is not doing business in the US. It's my US entity that's doing business in the US. And that means you can quarantine that tax risk of your US operations to your US company. So be aware, you'll see LLCs everywhere, but they're very, very rarely, probably 2%, 1% of our client base sets up an LLC under, mainly because they know that they're going to be extraordinarily profitable, extraordinarily quickly. And there are some tax benefits in doing so, but generally not. Taxes, be aware, really quickly. Taxes, there are many, many layers. As opposed to Australia, you've got federal income tax, you've also got state income tax. And every time you register in a state in order to operate there, which means getting people or property or sales volumes sometimes in a particular state, you're going to raise a tax liability at that state level as well as at a federal level. And whilst the whole bucket of taxes gets kind of shared out amongst the states, depending on where you operate, the fact is you've got to do tax filings. So again, you don't want to suddenly find yourself exposed to 10 states in the US because you've got 10 salespeople in 10 different locations. And at the end of the year, having to do 11 or 12 income tax filings, you're going to burn through your cash really quickly as a result. So again, be careful in terms of understanding that it's not one tax regime in the US or one tax system. You've got taxes at various levels across federal, state, and local administrations. Legal and practical requirements often differ. Patrick's going to speak to you in a minute about the legal things you should be aware of in the US, and they're critical. We don't do the legal work. But the fact is, a lot of the time people will say, for example, you don't need a representative in the US to register a company. You can have a company in the US with all foreign directors, and it's entirely accurate, legally correct. But the fact is, if you don't have somebody on the ground representing your business, it's really difficult to do a lot of things that you need, like getting the equivalent of your ABN, your employer identification number, your EIN, or getting your bank account opened. So oftentimes what's legally correct in the US and what's practically appropriate can be quite different. So just be aware of that. Banking, I could do an entire webinar on banking. And with due respect to my American colleagues on this call, on this webinar, the US banking system is far less advanced than the Australian banking system. There's a lot of reasons behind that, but just be aware, for example, that an awful lot of US companies like to pay with checks. And that means that a lot of the, for example, the neo-banking solutions, the challenger banks, Airwallex, Wise, etc., are not really practical for your operations in the US because they cannot receive checks. So you've got to be aware that, you know, there's checks that you've got to deal with, that banking itself, whilst it's easier opening accounts in the US than it is in other places like the UK, nonetheless can be really difficult to achieve what you want to achieve, to have a bank account on the ground that can pay your employee salaries, pay your vendors, and receive your payments from your clients. Two quick last things: visas and immigration. Make sure you get it right. I've had clients who have done the wrong thing with their visas in the US, who've been essentially arrested at the border, put in a cell for 48 hours and deported to Mexico, and had a black mark on their passport. You don't want that. So make sure you get your visas right. Don't just assume that you can go in under your ESTA visa waiver program and do whatever you want. You need to make sure you comply with the visa regulations in the US, same as you do here in Australia. So make sure you get that right. And lastly, really quickly, employing people is probably the most important thing you're going to do in the US. It's the hardest thing to get right and the most important thing to get right. We were lucky when we set up in the US. We've been through this same problem, all these same challenges that everybody on this call has been on, but we did it without ourselves. So we had to learn the hard way, but we also learned a lot from other Australians who'd scaled into market. Mm-hmm. But getting the right person on the ground to represent your business is really key. Obviously, relocating yourself, like Andrew has with RanchBot, FarmBot, into the US, it assists with that massively because you have somebody there to train and develop and grow your own business and your own employees. But if you don't have the capability to do that, you've really got to spend a lot of time to find the right person. Yeah. And salespeople always sound really good because they know how to sell. So that's the hardest part, is finding the right person with the right culture, the right personality, the ability to work independently, the ability to work autonomously. It's really, really key. So make sure you focus and spend a lot of time on finding the right person. That's it. They're my top 9.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks, Blair. That was really valuable. And now I'd like to pass over to Patrick Fazone. So Patrick actually was a former delegate of ours to SelectUSA, and it's a program to help Australian companies expand to the US. We're leading a delegation from the 1st to the 4th of May this year, and I'll provide a video at the end of Patrick's remarks. Patrick Fazone is co-founder and member of Washington Global Law. The beauty of this firm is it operates in Australia and the US. He has more than 25 years experience helping clients from all industries navigate the complex legal and regulatory environment. So I'm sure this will answer some of your questions too, Carlos. I'll pass it over to Patrick. Thanks.
Thanks, Georgie, and thank you to everybody for attending this today. It's a great session, fabulous discussion so far, and I just want to focus on 3 things that I think are important when you're thinking about the U.S. market. You know, we've worked with a lot of companies over the years. I guess I've seen the good, the bad, and the other. And, I guess, to some degree, I can see what works and what doesn't work. But a few things. Point number 1, and several people, including Blair and Andrew, have touched on this, but you really need to understand federalism in the United States, I guess. You know, what is, because the government is so important and the rule of law is so important, and the impact of law is so important, you really do need to understand that there are 3 levels of government in any case. And so you do have the federal government, immigration and all the rest of it. And definitely you do need to get the immigration side of it, the entry side of it right. But of course, the states also have plenty of authority, not just in taxation, but also in regulation, consumer protection regulation, and other key areas. It's easy to misapprehend that. And all you need to do is be in California, get hit with a Prop 65 lawsuit to understand that. And then, of course, there are local regulations and requirements that also apply. So, I think one of the keys as you're doing your due diligence, but also as you talk to people, is have an understanding that you really do need to address issues on 3 levels in the U.S. The second thing I just wanted to touch on, because I see it time and again, and of course I'm in the structuring business and the planning business and the risk mitigation business, is determining as a general matter, how are you going to get your products or your technology to users, to U.S. customers? Are you, and this is, more at a more general level, are you able to sell directly via your website to U.S. customers? Do you need to have dealers or distributors? Is that the best way? If it's pure software, perhaps you can do it directly from your website or a U.S. website. Is an agent going to be a solution for you? Do you need to establish a U.S. presence? And I thought that the comments so far were particularly relevant. David's comment, on setting up there. What he implied was setting up there to attract capital. And so, there is a reason to set up in the United States, but it may not just be to attract capital. It may not be to attract capital at all. It may be to employ people who can provide certain services that are adjunct to what you're doing, even if it's a pure export sale, such as customer support or technical, or figuring out ways to adapt your software or your product to local usage and local consumer requirements in the various different markets that we've all identified. There are 50 plus markets in the United States. So the reason why I mention this is because the way you deliver your product, or you want to deliver your product to customers, is going to determine the types of arrangements and legal relationships you have with these potential customers, partners, marketers, whatever. That's really critical. And a lot of course, where I dwell is in trying to get those relationships right. As most of the people, if not everybody on this call understands, the United States, U.S. Partners and consumers have a preference for legal instruments, not just verbal oral agreements. And so you want to understand what exactly you're trying to accomplish and who you're trying to accomplish it, and then get it right in terms of how to memorialize it. Final point is, okay, when you've identified maybe the ways that you can reach customers, do you have to go to individual ranches? Are you selling via dealers, distributors, whatever you've determined? Then how are you going to conduct it? How are you going to actually implement that? Are you going to sell via your website? If you are, how are you going to figure out how to add in sales tax if it's appropriate? How are you going to figure out what the sales tax rate is if it's appropriate? Do you use US-based contractors, or do you use employees? And there are, just like in Australia, there's a difference between having a contractor and having an employee. If you're going to have a marketing person, that might be different from a technical support person. Where are you going to base them? And we've identified the fact that you do want to be very aware of where your presence is going to be. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, to what extent do you need to adapt your technology or your product for local conditions? And this is something that I see a lot, is folks have a tremendous product, but then when they go to the United States, they sometimes have to massage it. So I think depending on what your plans are, then you can determine how to implement them and behave yourself in accordance with U.S. laws, regulations, and the business environment.
Thanks, Patrick. That was really helpful. And I'll again share everyone's details who spoke on the call in an email. I'd now like to share with you some information about our SelectUSA Investment Summit. So it's an event that's taking place from the 1st to the 4th of May this year, and it will be the opportunity for you to meet with every economic development agency represented in Washington, and you'll hear from all members of the US administration talking about, the opportunities to invest in the US. There is a particular session and whole day program focused on Australian tech companies expanding into the US, where you'll hear insights about raising capital, have the opportunity to pitch in front of potential US investors, connect with other, foreign businesses that have succeeded in market. And Duncan and I, alongside Mark, our Senior Commercial Officer, will be leading the delegation. Ambassador Caroline Kennedy launched this program for us, and I'd just like to play this quickly. Just one sec. So yeah, it's a really exciting program, and if you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to us after. It should be great. Yeah. So that comes to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much to our speakers who've joined us on the call. I mean, some of the key themes we heard was just how difficult and how vast, the terrain of the US is, and how sometimes difficult it is to really understand what the incentives are in different states. So a number of resources that were outlined on the webinar include, SelectUSA, which is a program that we're recruiting for at the moment. There is still time to apply, but do get in touch with us early. Austrade, a fantastic resource that operates in the US, and I could see Cassandra, who's based in Chicago office that looks after the AgTech sector, joined us today, so I can also share her details. And as well, like Patrick and Blair, the insights you shared about navigating the market from a regulatory perspective. Andrew, thank you so much for the insights you shared with us, that they were excellent. And David, from Ruminate. It's great to have, Western Australians on the call and to engage with companies across Australia and particularly in the regional areas. And a special thanks to the Consul General, Syrian Naya, based in Perth, for joining us today. But I hope you have a great rest of the day for those in Australia, and rest of the evening if you're in the US.